Hello everyone, I am Dr.Cho Yongseok from Dental Bean. So what are your thoughts, ladies and gentlemen, on the topic of flapless surgery? Among implant surgery cases, there are definitely clinical cases where flapless surgery should not be performed. However, there are also clinical cases where there's no reason not to perform flapless surgery. This flapless surgery has a dual nature, meaning it's a double-edged sword. When utilized appropriately, it serves as a truly outstanding instrument that greatly assists in clinical practice. However, if it's applied incorrectly or improperly, it can tragically become a weapon that ruins clinical practice. Now let's examine a specific clinical case to understand this better. So, this particular clinical case features a patient with a relatively narrow interdental space, and we performed flapless surgery for implant placement at sites 1-5 and 3-5. The patient is a 66-year-old female. She came in for implants at sites number 15 and number 35, which had been missing for a long time. The space is somewhat restricted and the bone width is also slightly diminished. In the maxilla, it doesn't look that narrow. While the interdental space is tight, the bone width itself is adequate. In the mandible, however, the bone width is also a bit narrow. Thus, we resolved to first generate a bit more room. Our strategy involved utilizing a simple enameloplasty to make space, followed by the direct and uncomplicated placement of the implant. We have just created a slight amount of space through the use of enameloplasty. And, as illustrated by the clinical image presented before you, we carried out the operation using a flapless approach. For tooth number 15, if you look at number 15, we did an under-preparation. Due to poor bone quality, we used a 3.5 taper drill last and placed a 4.0 by 10 mm implant. Primary stability was 15 NCM with an ISQ of 80. An implant was placed. We inserted a 4.0 by 10 mm implant and observed primary stability of 40 NCM with an 85-84 ISQ. So we did it flaplessly. It's very simple. It doesn't take much time either. Let's watch the video. After creating the required space, we position it and then proceed with drilling for number 15. The bone quality is somewhat weak. Consequently, I am using the 3.5 drill as the final one, given its reduced strength. I proceeded with careful drilling because there was a risk of contacting the adjacent tooth. We are placing the implant immediately. In this particular clinical case, it involves the maxilla, and given that there is ample keratinized gingiva, the procedure is quite manageable, assuming adequate bone width. Now the remaining task is to manage the depth, and I will place it approximately 4 to 5 mm deep, using the soft tissue as my reference point. Do you see those markings? They precisely show us the depth of the implant placement. It's now 3 mm in, 4 mm. It has entered almost 5 mm, and now the healing abutment. If we connect it, you can see it's almost. You can clearly see it went in close to 5 mm. Should the bone obstruct the path during insertion, we proceed with an alveolar-plasty. We got good primary stability, the healing abutment is connected, and the surgery is finished. The process concludes in a flash. Now let's look at the mandible. We secure the position. Although the space seems somewhat constricted, I do not foresee any significant challenges in placing a 4.0 implant, so we will proceed with the drilling process. The keratinized gingiva doesn't appear to be particularly insufficient right now. We're establishing our precise position. We use the 3.5 mm taper drill for this step. Now, when doing flapless, you have to hit the bottom. We go in until the stop touches the floor of the osteotomy. Currently, I'm performing the implant placement for a 4.0 by 8.5 sized implant. I'm adjusting the depth again. In this instance, I am also observing the markings and implanting deeper than 4 millimeters. It's at 3 millimeters now, a little deeper, and the bottom marking will indicate 4 millimeters. Fixation is strong. It's now in by 4 millimeters. Primary stability was strong. Then, I will connect the healing abutment and proceed to conclude the surgery. Alright, the surgery is complete. These are the X-ray findings. Number 15 in the maxilla is fine, no issues. Number 35 looks like it was placed slightly to the buccal side, but it wasn't. It appears that way because the buccal bone has resorbed. But since there's still a decent amount of bone width, it doesn't seem to be a problem. These are the findings after 1 month and 2 weeks, indicating favorable healing. Subsequently, an impression-taking procedure was carried out. After impression taking, you can see the final restoration has been seated in place. You can see that it was completed simply and without any complications. This is the view after 10 months. This is how it appears after a period of 2 years and 1 month. It was done with flapless surgery and there are no particular issues. In the maxilla, the bone width was good to begin with, so the result is favorable. The mandible's bone width has slightly reduced, but clinically, there are no major problems. This patient has been followed up for 3 years, and they're extremely satisfied, using their restoration quite effectively. Performing flapless surgery long after an extraction, as seen here, requires careful selection. However, the efficiency is extremely high. The results aren't bad either. If a perfect outcome isn't the goal, this clinical case is quite suitable for flapless surgery. Now, let's look at a clinical case where an implant was placed immediately after extraction. To be honest, this case presents some challenges. While waiting a bit after the extraction would have simplified things, for various reasons, the implant was placed immediately following the extraction. I frequently discuss this in my lectures regarding immediate implant placement, but I almost never elevate a flap. The surgical procedure was carried out utilizing a flapless technique. On the post-operative X-ray, you can clearly observe that the implants are optimally positioned, and the final outcome was indeed highly satisfactory. For beginners, I recommend limiting the incidence of flapless surgery procedures to below 10%. I suggest this approach as a cautious measure to ensure optimal outcomes while gaining experience. As we advance, if we develop it, we can increase that proportion a bit higher, performing flapless surgery in up to, say, 40% of cases. If you change your mindset. If you change this concept, you can get close to 70%. And depending on your clinical philosophy, some practitioners might even raise it up to 90%. But candidly, at that level, certain adverse effects often begin to manifest. Flapless surgery doesn't only have advantages, it has disadvantages too. And a side effect is that you start to compensate for those disadvantages by simply accepting them as part of the benefit. Exceeding that, for example, doing it more than 90% of the time, I would consider that achievable only if one possesses an almost religious level conviction in its application. Some even do it 100%, but that's fanaticism. Ultimately, you can perform flapless procedures to match your skill level. Initially, begin with a conservative proportion, then gradually expand its application as your proficiency grows. This will enable you to execute a greater number of flapless surgeries, significantly enhancing your clinical practice. Currently, I estimate my own rate to be around 80%. Approximately 80% of my current implant procedures are performed using the flapless surgery technique. And as my indications have become more precise and my technical proficiency has advanced, I am now performing flapless surgery on a significant number of patients. Though I had previously prepared a lecture on flapless surgery quite some time ago, I hadn't made it public. However, I have recently revised and re-recorded it for this presentation. Best flapless surgery. I have boldly entitled it, The Pinnacle of Flapless Surgical Technique. In fact, I created this lecture with much anticipation and great expectations. That's precisely because I'm convinced this lecture will be immensely beneficial to numerous clinicians. However, on the flip side, I harbor certain reservations. I'm genuinely concerned that beginners might excessively overuse and improperly misuse it. Even after creating this lecture 20 years ago, I kept hesitating. I had thoroughly contemplated whether delivering this lecture would be appropriate or not, but ultimately, I have resolved to make it available to the public. This is because my thoughts are now much clearer, and I can articulate them more precisely. Thus, if you attend my lecture and apply its principles, you can effectively prevent complications. You shouldn't overuse it, but anyway, that's the situation. Now, this content is what I've specifically produced for the purpose of delivering this lecture. I have created it, encompassing more than 10 distinct topics. There are indispensable things you need to grasp regarding this flapless surgery. There is essential foundational knowledge, and I will meticulously guide you through each part, step by step, ensuring nothing is missed. I truly poured my heart and soul into creating this lecture. I filmed many lectures, but in terms of the script, this piece was crafted so meticulously in its content and presentation that I believe it's my finest creation. For those with well-established habits, it's perfectly fine to carry on. Personally, I think intermediate level practitioners will find this lecture incredibly helpful. Furthermore, I anticipate that even novice practitioners, by attending and applying my lecture, will discover that their clinical procedures become somewhat more manageable. This content covers flapless surgery, but it's not just the surgical technique itself. I will meticulously organize and present the essential concepts regarding the optimal timing and methods for performing this procedure after a tooth extraction. A fine blade, you know, a knife is indeed an exceptionally useful implement. However, if this tool is improperly used, it might turn into a truly dangerous weapon. What should be done then? As a knife maker, should I simply stop making them? That's not correct. A master craftsman who forges blades must put in their best effort to create a good knife. And we must hope that such a tool will be utilized for its intended and appropriate purpose. That's how I feel after filming this flapless surgery lecture. I believe I have forged a truly fine knife. And if those who listen to this lecture utilize it correctly for its intended purpose, I believe it will prove to be an exceptionally valuable instrument. So this lecture on flapless surgery, I genuinely hope and am confident that this lecture will become a legendary sword of Hattori Hanzo, an ultimate tool that empowers you to reach the pinnacle of your profession. I encourage you all to watch it. Thank you.